Okay, everyone, we're going to be talking about our next section. It's about the Neolithic times, or in other words, they also call it the agricultural revolution. So anything I'm writing or underlining, I would like you to write on the Google Doc that's provided on Google Classroom. This is kind of the same thing as we did the last part. We're going to go over some notes, and then you will have Google Slides to fill out, and then an Ed puzzle. And that'll be it. Okay, so anything I write, you write, I will read it aloud to you, and then we will go from there. Okay, Neolithic times. Guiding question. How did farming change people's lives? The earliest people were nomads who moved from place to place to hunt animals and gather plants. After the last ice age ended, Earth's temperature rose. As the climate warmed, many nomads moved into areas with a mild climate and fertile land. Another historical revolution then occurred. For the first time, people began staying in one place to grow grains and vegetables. Gradually, farming replaced hunting and gathering as the main source of food. At the same time, people began to domesticate, or tame, animals for human use. Animals transported goods and provided meat, milk, and wool. Okay, so there's a few things we're actually going to underline and highlight. So I'm going to underline a couple of things and then I'll write about it. Okay, here we go. So we're going to go with fertile land, and then we're going to go with domesticate, and farming replaced hunting. Okay, so for the first part here, we're going to write fertile. Fertile just means rich. Oops, that's not supposed to be there. Rich, growable land. So what that means is anything that was planted in that land, it was able to produce food. So crops and vegetation and different things like that. So that was really great. So we're going to tie that in with right there, in case you don't know where we found it. Okay, so farming replaced hunting and gathering, meaning people were able to stay in one spot. So we're going to add this over here. People were able to settle. And that's what we'll say. So now that they were able to farm, they created their own food, basically, right? So they had their own crops, which means they didn't have to go gather for it, and they didn't have to hunt as often. And then a vocabulary word, domesticate. I need you to write it. So domesticate, which means to tame animals for human use. So they basically trained them to do different things. Okay, our next one is the Neolithic Age. This change in the way people lived marked the beginning of the Neolithic Age. It began about 8000 BCE and lasted until around 4000 BCE, about 4,000 years. The word Neolithic is Greek for new stone. Calling this time period the New Stone Age, however, is somewhat misleading. Although new stone tools were made, the real change in the Neolithic Age was the shift from hunting and gathering to systematic agriculture. This is growing food on a regular basis. This shift from hunting and gathering to food production, however, did not happen quickly. Even during the Mesolithic Age or the Middle Stone Age, some people continued to hunt and gather while others began to grow their own food. Okay, so our first word being, I want you to write this. So Neolithic Age means new stone. So the New Stone Age. So you should write Neolithic Age equals New Stone Age. Okay. The next vocabulary word I want you to write is systematic agriculture. And it's just growing food on a regular basis. So they had a system. So we'll write that over here. Systematic agriculture. Okay, which means growing food on a regular basis. Alright. So the shift, like it says in the second paragraph, the shift took quite a bit of time, right? So the shift did not happen quickly. It took time. And in the Middle Stone Age, some people did both. They still hunted and gathered, while others actually began to start farming. Okay, big changes for humankind. Historians call this settled farming the agricultural revolution. Oops. Settled farming, agricultural revolution. The word revolution refers to any change that has an enormous effect on people's way of life. While hunter-gatherers ate wild grains that they collected, early farmers saved some of the grains to plant. Humans lived differently once they learned how to grow crops and tame animals that produced food. They now could produce a constant food supply. This allowed the population to grow at a faster rate. Nomads gave up their way of life and began living in settled communities. Some historians consider the agricultural revolution the most important event in human history. Okay, so the first word we're going to write is revolution. Revolution is okay. Actually, let me rewrite that, sorry. Okay. There we go. Okay, revolution means, or is, any change that has an effect on people's lives. We'll just shorten it a little bit. Has an effect on people's lives. Excellent. Okay, so it's the first one you should write for this slide. The next part is humans lived differently once they learned how to grow crops and tame animals. So now they had a constant food supply, which allowed the population to increase. Okay, so their life changed. They adapted, right? Like we learned in the last unit. They learned to adapt. They had a new way of surviving and a new way of gaining food in different ways to help them survive. So they just adapted even more so. So now they had farming, which meant they were in one place. And by being in one place, they were able to help their population grow. So we will say this. New food supply, which would be farming, right, led to a higher population. Right? Because they didn't have to go anywhere. They didn't have to go hunt. They didn't have to go gather any food. Alright. Okay, so get that written down and then we'll go on to our next one. Okay. Widespread farming. By 8000 BCE, people in Southwest Asia began growing wheat and barley. They also domesticated pigs, cows, goats, and sheep. From there, farming spread into southeastern Europe. By 4000 BCE, farming was an established economic activity in Europe. At about the same time, around 6000 BCE, People had begun growing wheat and barley in the Nile Valley in Egypt. Farming soon spread along the Nile River and into other regions in Africa. In Central Africa, different types of crops emerged. There, people grew root crops, called tubers, which included yams. They also grew fruit crops, such as bananas. Wheat and barley farming moved eastward into India, about 8,000 to 5,000 BCE. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about, I had forgotten to mention earlier, the dates. So you'll notice that the dates count down, but time still moves forward. Okay, so it's not like they're going back in time. So when it says, for example, 8,000 BCE, and they go down to 4,000 BCE, time still goes forward. They just count down. The reason why they count down, actually, I don't know the reason, but the reason how we can tell is because it just helps us differentiate between the two centuries. So it goes all the way down, and then eventually, okay, pretend these are all the years, and then it starts again back at 1, which is how we get to where we are now. Right, we're in 2020. So then after it counts down, they skip 0 and go to 1, and then we start counting up again. So that's why you see the dates get smaller as time goes forward. Okay, so our first vocabulary word, or only vocabulary word on this side, is economic. And economic just pertains to money or wealth. So with the farming, because it began spreading across the world, it established economic activity, meaning their land and their areas started becoming wealthy. They had an economy, so they had things to trade and they had things to sell. That's how you get an economy. Back then, they didn't have money, right? They didn't have dollar bills or coins or things like that until later. So they had crops to trade or materials to trade and different things like that. That was their economy. So as the economic activity began in Europe and other areas of the world, farming was still very much a thing. It didn't just happen in one place and that's it, right? It spread out throughout the world so that everybody began to farm. Okay, by 6000 BCE, people in northern China were growing a food grain called millet and were domesticating dogs and pigs. By 5000 BCE, farmers in Southeast Asia were growing rice. From there, rice farming spread into southern China. In the Western Hemisphere between 7000 and 5000 BCE, people in Mexico and Central America were growing corn, squash, and potatoes. They also domesticated chickens and dogs. Okay, so notice this. In different places, so on the last slide we talked about Europe and India. This slide we have China and Southeast Asia, and then down here we have Mexico and Central America. All of these places each had their own crop and each thing they were growing, which is really awesome because that's how the whole trading happened and how certain areas became famous or more well known for growing certain things. So, like this paragraph, you have China and I'm going to abbreviate Southeast Asia. Okay. They had rice and they had millet, which is another grain, right? And it's also because then these things spread into southern China. And so while part of the world was growing one crop, the other part of the world, so Mexico and Central America, they were growing corn. Oops, that looks like corn. Corn, squash, and potatoes. So each area had their own crop. So for example, the ground and the land in Mexico and Central America is very different than the ground that grows in China and in Asia, right? So in Mexico and Central America, they may not have been able to grow rice as well as Central or Southeastern Asia. Just like China and Asia may not have been able to grow corn, squash, and potatoes. So this was really awesome because it opened so many doors for people to travel, right? They travel from place to place and settle into different regions, into different areas. And this is how civilizations kind of started, right? People went from place to place and they took new things and they developed things from what they've learned from other people. So this is the start of how our world became so connected, and it's really awesome to see. And as we go forward, we'll learn more about other areas and what they grew and what they built and what they traded and what they accomplished. But this is just the beginning. Okay, so next, this was our end of our notes. You're going to go to Google Slides, and it's the same information, and now you're going to fill in the slides with complete sentences. Use your notes, use the reading. It can read to you. Watch the videos, look at the pictures, and then complete your work, and then you'll do an Ed puzzle. All right, here we go.